Rachel, you're on mute. You're still on mute. I don't even know how to unmute you. Um, I think you're off mute now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was probably talking. I was like, oh, okay. What I was saying, don't worry if you haven't read the book or the introduction before today. So we have like extracts on each PowerPoint, so we can just like talk from those points. So I don't know, maybe like 2 minutes to read these extracts, and then we'll go on to the questions. Okay, I don't know if that has been 2 minutes. So, but I mean, we can, answer the questions and then just input as we go along. So, the first one, man has always exploited his natural environment in order to make a living. Um, and human hand in hand. What is life if there is no, according to Walter Rodney, if there is no exploitation? So, given like the other two extracts, which kind of give like context. So, one, is this true? And if so, how do we approach our relationship with our natural environment to ensure that exploitation is limited or ceases to exist or is controlled, if that's even possible? So, free. I can go first. Um, I don't know. I feel like exploitation. I feel like exploitation, especially as I understand it, is a very violent process, and it's very, yeah, it's a very violent process, and it is very intentional. So I don't see how there can be relationships where exploitation is not involved, and where it could be like an exchange, so giving and receiving. I feel like the exploitation is very, yeah, as I said, is very strong. So I think personally, I do think there is a way to live without exploiting the natural environment, but then because exploitation, you can only, well, if I'm understanding it correctly, you can only exploit something if that person, if you take away agency from that thing. And I think just have agency? It's sort of an abstract question. Like, does it have agency? If it does, how are we supposed to understand it? And is it just a relationship of exchange, or is it a thing of the, the um, stuff like that? I do understand, but if it has always existed, I'm not too sure. I don't know. If anyone wants to, contribute, feel free to.
Naz?
Hi, can everyone hear me? I'm really sorry, I'm on the bus.
Yeah, I
Okay,
can hear you.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think one way to look at it is like viewing ourselves as separate, and I think that really solidifies um, ex- the the exploitation the exclusive relationship we have between us and nature, because the way we've seen it is like the accumulation of natural resources is like has always been for profit, with like, you know, just capitalism and whatnot, and I think that sort of alienation from nature itself helps us to see as our relationship with nature as different and as one that has power relations involved in it. Whereas if we actually situate ourselves within nature, I think that would definitely help to reduce that.
For anyone else?
Yeah, I was also going to agree. I don't think I agree that men have always exploited their natural environment in order to make a living. I think, like you said, there's a difference between like exploiting and like stripping than like living on and like living with. And I think kind of like what Naz was saying, like to live on and live with, you need to resituate yourself within like the land and within nature. So I wouldn't say that exploitation is just a natural, you know, side effect to being human or just living, I suppose. But yeah. Rachel, also, I'm not sure if it's my Wi-Fi, but I think you were cutting out like a lot. But I don't know if it was just my Wi-Fi.
No, it's mine. My Wi-Fi is terrible. That's how when I was talking, I was like, can these people even hear me? But let me know, like, if you, yeah, let me know if I need to like move if it's really bad. So is there anyone else? Okay, I'll move on.
I think Hannah has her hand up.
Oh right, okay.
I wanted to say that I agreed with Rachel because, like, if we look in the past, really, before capitalism and stuff, people usually interact with the land like, yeah, they still killed animals, which there's lots of moral debates for that, but it wasn't to the like sheer exploitation and just farming everything just to generate a profit and like creating things like monocultures just to get a profit. It wasn't that intense. I feel like indigenous people respected the land and understood that whilst also they were with the land, like the land was working for them, but they're also humble to the land as well. But oh my god, colonialism is like, no, I'm the boss, like get out.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think especially with indigenous cultures, we can see that as much as they like use the land and they cultivate their land, it's not like it's not excessive. They don't do too much because they don't need to. And I'm not sure, I don't know, I feel like I don't know, I was just thinking. But like humans are part of nature. And I feel like when we start understanding, okay, as much as we live within nature, we are part of nature. So the way that we go about interacting with our natural environment should be a thing of like it's a leveled experience, as opposed to humans are above nature and like humans can just take because they're superior to nature, when really and truly like they're just part of nature. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add. If no one else has their hand up, we can move on. Okay, move on. Okay, so this one also some extract. So essentially all of these, can you hear me guys? I don't know.
We can hear you, Rachel.
Okay. Because it's just so quiet, I just don't know. Okay, yeah, so all of these extracts essentially talk about slavery and like the transatlantic slave trade and the idea of like ownership, not only of people and individuals, but also of land, and how those two like coexist. And it also talks about nature. So I feel like maybe a minute or two to read over it, and then we can like talk about slavery, ownership, and nature and how they intersect with one another. Okay, I feel like that is that enough time? I hope so. So yeah, are there any thoughts, even from like these extracts, but just in general about like those topics? I can go first. I'll go first. I feel like slavery, I think the nature of slavery with it being a system, of ownership, has meant that, or it mirrors that of like owning land. And I do think, as much as like, say for example, slave owners in the American South, as much as they owned both the land and like the slaves, it was that it was also that thing of like extraction and extracting from things that you own. So I think when it comes to the environment and like climate change as we see it today, because of that relationship of, okay, humans own this land, and because I own this, I can extract it. I think as much as that is how society functions, we all acknowledge that society as it is today is a bit of a shit show. Like, not even a bit, it's a lot of a shit show. So yeah, I think those like, as much as slavery, yes, abolition, stuff like that, that whole relationship, which is very like sinister in nature, still continues today. And like the idea of, like, I understand owning land, but just the idea of like, why do we need to pay rent for a place to live? Like, where did this idea of like owning land, like owning something that no one like not one human created this well, personally I don't think so. So not one human created this earth, so like why is there a system that means that humans are indebted to pay, when the idea of ownership is inherently flawed? And like owners, the people who are able to be owners are like people who have previously and continue to exploit so many Black and brown people in the global South today. Like, I don't know, it just really upsets me. It just really upsets me. But if anyone has their hand up, you can, butt in.
Hey, sorry, I can't actually put my hand up for some reason, but yeah, it kind of really struck me what you said a bit about kind of slavery still continuing today. And I think what you mentioned about almost like putting a price on land and like charging rent, it made me kind of consider like the ties with capitalism and like how these kind of go together as well. And this notion of like slavery being like continuing onward and like capitalism almost like feeding off of that. I think in today's society, like if you approach it through a Marxist lens, I think you can definitely kind of see it in that way. And I think Rodney's work relates quite a lot to dependency theory from what I've read previously, if that helps at all, I think.
Thank you. Does anyone else have their hand up?
Yeah, I was gonna add, like in another bit of the book, it talks about how when a few people own the land, like in Europe, and the majority were tenants, this allowed the few to concentrate on improving their land. But I'm reading from the book here. It says, in contrast, under communalism, every African was assured of sufficient land to meet his own needs by virtue of being a member of family or community. And for that reason, and because land was relatively abundant, there were few social pressures or incentives for technical changes to increase productivity. And I think that speaks a lot to how, like, again, talking about the links between like capitalism and ownership and slavery, how the different relationships with the land produce, or like different economic systems produce different relationships with the land, which then produce different like exploitations of the land. If you're seeing it as something whereby you can extract wealth out of through rent from your tenants, instead of seeing it as something that provides for yourself and your family, the technologies that you develop and the way that you behave is vastly different than if you were just seeing it as something to provide for yourself, your family, and your community. So I thought that was quite interesting in the book.
Yeah, I really like that. Well, you can send me the extracts when we're done. But yeah, that sounds really nice. And I think also, especially from the first extract where it's like, okay, for instance, when the inhabitants of a given area were reduced below a certain number in an environment where the, I don't know how to say that, fly was present, the remaining few had to abandon the area. And I think it's like, as much as that is just one example in isolation, I think it does represent the wider structure and the byproducts of slavery, whereby yes it was like laborious, and yes it was, you know, all of those things, like the Middle Passage, it was terrible. I think also in terms of on the continent of Africa, or in the continent of Africa, where the population loss then had a secondary impact on nature, or not even had a secondary impact, but we can see how the two are directly related. And it's like, okay, because of this system of ownership, because of this system of exploitation, it has now meant that the land has had to, not that the land has had to suffer, but because the land has and the environment has responded in a particular way, other people who remain in those societies, in those communities in Africa, are affected by the change, by the, I guess, by the change in like the relationship between humanity and the like natural environment. So yeah, I think it's just really interesting to see that as much as that colonialism, yes, it had effects on the person, but the person also had effects on nature, and that nature had effects on other people. So that all these factors are interconnected. And I think it just, yeah, it makes me very angry, because slavery, like colonialism, they didn't need to do that, but they decided to. Like, it was a choice, which, you know, that was a bad choice. But yeah, does anyone else have their hand up?
Yeah. If I can go. But yeah, I just wanted to say, I didn't even think about that, how much like it destroyed like the community through destroying nature as well, because you wasn't only trying to fight off like the environment and the world, you're also trying not to get enslaved, but you also, like, you can't really focus and grow your food, you can't really focus and build the land and build a community when you're wondering, oh my God, is he going to leave me tomorrow? And that is the heartbreaking effects, because even today, like, we see how that plays out. Everybody thinks that, especially with African Americans and like the general diaspora, I feel like there's not a real relation and we don't feel related to them. But like, if you read like the book Homegoing, that is one of the best books ever. Like, you just realize that you just realize that we're just all related, and it's just so crazy. But the community part was also part of nature, because when you break down that relation to everything, you feel disconnected, and that was one of the main objectives of slavery, to disconnect you from everything else.
I completely agree. And I think Homegoing is my favorite book of all time. Like, it just does so much for me. But I feel like then
it made me cry.
I was sobbing at the end, like, okay, maybe TMI, but no, I was literally in tears. I feel like we can really like see the effects of the fragmentation, is that word? I don't know. I'm trying to be smart. The fragmentation of slavery and colonialism, and how those things, yeah, as much as it was centered, like as much as the story is about like a lineage, it is set in communities, and it is set in Africa, and it's set in the American South, and it's like, okay, they talk about, I don't know, I can get into it, but I feel like, especially for the chapters on on slavery and the slave trade in Ghana, I feel like those chapters where you see, okay, people were hiding in trees, okay, but what, okay, so if that was the situation, and we know that is, you know, that is founded on like historical evidence, where runaway slaves would hide in trees, and when they would like their relationship with nature, and we'll get onto it later, but I do think just within like the context of this, and I don't want to sound too like all like soppy, but I do think like nature is so beautiful, like trees and flowers and stars and like all of that is so beautiful. And I feel like when oppressed people navigate through nature, I feel like that relationship is just so beautiful to see, because as much as like nature oppresses nature, nature being like colonizers, and the other nature being oppressed people, specifically like enslaved Africans, how nature oppresses nature, but then within that nature that's oppressed, there's also a relationship with like the natural environment, which is also nature. Does this make sense? I hope it does. But yeah, that's just my 2 pence, and then we can move on if I'm
Yeah, it sounds really interesting, to be honest. I never really thought about it in that way, in terms of like a relationship within nature itself, and like that being quite a peaceful thing. Yeah, it's really nice.
I was just going to add as well. I really like the way you linked, like not just when. Oh my God, what am I trying to say? When our relationship to the land, like the physical land of Africa, was like tethered or like severed, it also severed our like links to each other. And I was thinking about how like virtually like social media has like tried to has reestablished some of those links. I don't know how successfully, you know, that has been done. But I just thought that was a really interesting way to look at it. Like not just like were you removed from land, but you were removed from like community and the repercussions that had on the community that remained as well. Yeah, I just thought that was so interesting.
I'll go to the next slide because I don't think anyone else. So do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, okay. So the no wait, let me give like 2 minutes for people to read through it and then
Oh right.
I think that's been like 2 minutes. Yeah, so I was like the questions on this slide or the excerpts on this slide. Recently, like I've been thinking a lot more about like neo-imperialism in the African context, and how like colonialism obviously has continued and re-perpetuated itself and reincarnated itself in like slightly different forms, but we can definitely still see its links to the 1900 context. And I found what Rodney was writing about how African development is only possible on the basis of a radical break with the international capitalist system really interesting. But for me, I was just wondering what that looks like. So that's why I put that question there. And then also thinking about like colonization. I feel like when we talk about colonization, we talk about like the colonization of land and physical spaces. But when we talk about decolonizing or decolonization, at least in the way that I've heard it talked about, we don't really focus on the environmental perspective of it or the environmental aspect of it. Like, what does it look like to actually reclaim your land? What do you, how does your relationship change with the land once you've reclaimed it? So yeah, so those are just some of the questions that if anyone wants to add anything to them or speak around them. For me?
I'll go actually if you want. So the first question that you mentioned about the radical break, I think it's hard to imagine what it would look like, because like the African continent is so like involved in the financial system and the international financial system now, in the way that Western countries set it up to kind of extract the resources and for their own benefit in a sense. So if there's a way to cut ties in that sense and like reissue power back to African countries, then that could be a potential way to kind of do that, but then you kind of still be within the capitalist system, maybe. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what you guys think.
Tommy? I can't tell if. Okay, I don't know. I don't know whether you mean to unmute your, but you're still muted. I forgot what I was gonna say now.
Everyone's having tech issues.
When I was like thinking around this question, like when he was talking about African development, I was thinking about like Pan-Africanism. And I was thinking as well, like the context in which Rodney is writing, he talks a lot about Africa, Africa, Africa. He does like talk about individual countries too, but I feel like that's something like that kind of Pan-Africanist understanding of Africa is something that's declined in recent years. So I was like, a radical break with the international capitalist system looks like Pan-Africanism to me. Yeah, but that's all I could really think of.
Also, I can't put my hand up physically, so I'm so sorry if someone has their hand up. I think that's really interesting because I feel like Pan-Africanism for me, like I understand it as a ideology and like as a thing. My thing is, isn't it quite, because okay, so I know that as we're doing like liberation work, we know that okay, we can't go back to the past. Like history is history for a reason. So it's like okay, but pre-colonization, all Africa as a continent wasn't really. There were communities within the continent, and those communities had their own they had their own issues, they had their own friends and stuff like that. So when it comes to like Pan-Africanism and the idea that Africa is one thing and how it like how Africa is one thing, maybe I just don't understand the theory enough, but it's just like how is that any different to like, I don't want to say like hotepery is that thing, but like how is that any different in terms of like not acknowledging the individual the individual communities? But then at the same time I do understand Pan-Africanism is important because all these countries in Africa have been and are victims of like neocolonialism and imperialism by the West. So I think it is like a bit sticky. And then I was thinking about the last extract where it talks about the situation, where it says the situation is that Africa has not yet come anywhere close to making the most of its natural wealth. And I think, is that like, in terms of making the most of natural wealth, like why, I feel like making the most of it will be necessary if we do decide to continue living in a capitalist system. So I don't know, maybe it's just my understanding of it, but please like let me know if you interpreted it differently. So yeah, I think kind of like going back to the question, what does a radical break within the international capitalist system look like? I think it's just like a complete, like, can we just pretend that the West isn't there? I know that we can't really, but just like, like no contact with the West, or just like, I don't know. I feel like that the impacts of globalization and the impacts of imperialism have meant that we do want to like get from land, and we do want to acknowledge that there is that mineral rich in that area of the land. So for example, I'm from Ghana, and when we were learning like the colors of the flag whenever we were learning it, I remember learning that the yellow part of the flag represents gold, which is like a rich mineral in Ghana, which is why it was previously called the Gold Coast by the British Empire. But then I think, okay, why is this gold valuable? It's valuable because it's valued within a capitalist system. So talking about moving forward and like the idea of a nation, it's founded within the parameters of colonialism. But I feel like I've been speaking for a long time, so I'm going to be quiet and in case someone else has their hand up.
Naz, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna touch on the bit where it says like that African development is possible only on the basis of a radical break with the international capitalist system. I think it really depends on the way we see the wording in that sentence, because I feel like it's not, to me, it suggests like the continent of Africa just disengages, but then the rest of like international capitalism is still there. That's what like that's what it reads as to me. But then, do I think that's possible? No. And so, like a radical break with the international capitalist system means a radical break from the international capitalist system everywhere. But then I don't know if I just haven't read enough of the book and that I'm interpreting it wrong. Yeah.
Tommy?
Yeah, I think it's a fair critique of like Pan-African thought, like at this point, like about the possibility of whether or not like Africa could actually radically break the international capitalist system. I think it's probably from the bits of this book that I've read, and from what I know about Rodney in general, it might be because at the time there was like, for example, obviously there was the Soviet Union, but there was also China, which uh, to him was like a good example of like a developing socialist power that wasn't developing within capitalism. So like in that sense, there were all these sorts of alliances that might be able to like be struck or whatever, to like kind of exist outside of it. But I mean, definitely now it's not the case that like I think Africa could exist like on its own with like a break from the international capitalist system, just because like the global division of labor and imperialism have conditioned countries such that they literally are only able to produce what is needed in like what they produce is basically geared towards the interest of like the imperial core. It's not the case that Africa could suddenly just say, okay, we're going to opt out of these circuits of consumption, etc., and we're just going to be completely self-sufficient, because it doesn't have the resources and doesn't have the technology that's necessary for that, which is a result of imperialism in itself. So I think to an extent, Rodney might even underestimate like how powerful and like how deeply shaping imperialism is of like the current economic conditions. Just another point on the last extra. I'm not sure what Rachel said, so I'm not sure if I'm repeating you, but I don't like how he talks about like wealth and like, because I'm not sure what exactly you said, but I think you had a critique of it. But yeah, I don't like necessarily the focus on like producing wealth for Africa. I think like the our aim should be to abolish the concept of wealth. I think realistically, like he seems to be measuring progress along like pretty capitalist, along with capitalist values rather than actual like socialist ones.
All the thoughts that I had literally just flew out my head as soon as Tommy stopped speaking. Um, I was gonna say on the radical break with the international capitalist system. I think like kind of what Tommy and Naz were saying, for Africa to take a break from the national capitalist system, then the system has been dismantled. Like if this system is relying on the global south for it's like to be fed, like if that's how it's feeding itself, then for you to break from it, it doesn't exist anymore. Or for Africa to break from it, it doesn't exist anymore. um yeah, I think the critique on pan-Africanism is fair. I think the way that I was thinking of it was more in terms of like solidarity, especially around the NSARS protest and like the cross African solidarity that we saw with that. But yeah, it is a really fair critique of pan-Africanism. Yeah. Does anybody want to add anything on the second question?
I was going to say, for the second question, when I think of it, like I'm reminded of South Africa and how there's like diamond mining is a very big thing. And then I know that like I was reading about De Beers, which is just a terrible company. I mean, capitalism is terrible. De Beers, and how like they mined, like they have so many different diamond mines all over South Africa, and the idea of a mine where it's like you're digging, and it now means that that land is uninhabitable, and nature that once existed on that land can no longer exist, and just the idea of just messing with the flow of nature in order to get diamonds. I think, I think especially because South Africa now has a very weird relationship with imperialism, because I feel like South Africa is just very like the imperial body like metamorphosizes into like different companies. So I think it's like, as much as the relationship is like ever changing, it still remains the same. So I think the idea of like just the diamond mine just messing up the flow of nature, that doesn't sit right with me. So I think decolonizing from an environmental perspective would mean that just a complete divestment from those capitalist like imperialist powers, and just like acknowledging that as much as diamond can be found here, it doesn't mean that it must be found within those different mines.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say it also goes back to the point on like wealth. Like if you're mining diamonds, it's to accumulate, wealth. It doesn't really have a purpose outside of like sitting there looking pretty and costing a lot of money. So like if you're decolonizing from that, if you're like divesting from wealth, and the purpose of your work isn't to accumulate wealth, then why would you mine like diamonds? So that kind of like reimagining of the way that you live and way that you work with the land necessitates like a decolonial perspective as well. Yeah, I'm not sure if I phrased that right, but whatever. Does anybody else want to say anything on this slide, or shall we move on to the next one?
So the next slide is about like knowledge, and just like generational knowledge that has been. Okay, we'll read it and then we'll go on to the questions. So when we read, like, think about how we begin to learn about our environment when so much knowledge has been massacred away by neo-colonialism and climate change affecting patterns in nature, and what does this mean about the knowledge we value? So I'll give like 2 minutes to read over the extract. And you can just put your hand up if you have anything you want to say.
I was gonna say the last line on the second screenshot, like flowers, however, were irrelevant to survival, is similar to the point about diamonds. Like, you don't need to know, like the point that you're making about mining diamonds, like it's irrelevant to survival. So why would you even like develop the technology or know how to do it? Yeah, that's all I had to add. Sorry, go. But then Halima has her hand up.
I was just gonna say, I think kind of relating to, I can't remember what event it was, but it was an event last week, how we were talking about like, okay, as much as like ancestors knew knowledge and they knew how to like cultivate the land and do all of those things. Because of colonialism, because of like language barriers, or just like, you know, just death caused by different things, we don't have that same knowledge today. So it's like, okay, how do we begin to reconcile our relationship with nature, especially in Africa? Like, how do we begin to learn about raining patterns and things like that when it's like the people who've been knowing those things are no longer like with us. And it's also the fact that climate change has meant that the like seemingly regular, or what used to be regular raining patterns, or just like, I don't know, natural patterns, don't exist in the same way that they do. And I think that has meant that for like now, as much as we can try to learn, and I feel like we should try to learn as much as possible, it will be even more difficult given the hurdle of climate change.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry, I have really bad network, but I think really it comes from, we need to look at why people are even mining diamonds in the first place, and other things, and other like I'm gonna use the example of cocoa because I watched a documentary about it. Why people are mining cocoa in the first place, and other like natural resources of Africa, is because literally that's the only way to get money, and like they are pushed that into that way because of the wider capitalism and imperialist structures. Like you would stay at home, but after you have no money, and now you need money to access everything in the world. And I think just generally wider organizing around helping Africa and helping people not be pushed into this, because even like the guys who were picking up the cocoa, they did not even know what it was going to be used for after, and they did not even see value in that. It's the people in the West who are more seeing the value and exploiting that value of it, and you're disconnected from the knowledge of that value. And because when after the guys who were mining the cocoa, right, they brought a chocolate bar, and they were like, this is what your work is producing. And that was the first time they ever tasted chocolate in their life. And I think it even kind of goes back to like the disconnection from work, alienation, that Marxist concept. Like, you're alienated from what you're producing in the first place, so you don't even like know what you're producing, and your work is not even your work, because at the end of the day they're paying them about 20p a month for that. And how much is chocolate sold for? And I think we can even support that by buying less chocolate, buying more free range chocolate, and just the general things. And yeah, if we can. I'm done speaking.
And I think like going off that, that like cocoa in itself is really interesting, because as much as like as much as cocoa farmers know which cocoa is the best, or know which one, you know, like know which one will make it through to the next stage, it's just so like mind-boggling that they, as much as they know, okay, yeah, this is good cocoa, they don't know what it's good cocoa for, because as you said, they don't know what the end product is, or they will have limited understanding of what the end product is, and limited understanding of the process that followed like cocoa farming. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, because it's like, okay, the knowledge that we then have, it doesn't it, yes, it is knowledge, but it doesn't contribute to the wider knowledge of knowing about chocolate. It's like, okay, you know about cocoa, which is good, but then cocoa is for the end product that we don't know about. So I feel like the knowledge that we do have in terms of farming and stuff, well, I can only like cocoa farming and like other things that are kind of exported to the West and stuff like that. I feel like that kind of knowledge is quite difficult to see the value in it, especially when we think about post-colonialism, because what value will cocoa have? And I think it's also similar to diamonds, because, well, if I'm correct, diamonds don't have any intrinsic value. So it's people saying, okay, this thing is valuable. But if you don't see that thing as valuable, what is knowing about that thing going to do for you in like your personal life and your own like knowledge? I think that's really, yeah.
Exactly, Rachel. And I think even the diamond example, when I watched, sorry, I watch a lot of documentaries, and when I watched a documentary about diamonds as well, the little boys who were picking up the diamonds, they were like, we like, what is this? It looked like dirt. They were just picking up dirt, and this is what people are dying for. Like this is what's on the Queen's crown. You know, I feel like when we, honestly, don't even get me started about Lizzie, but when we take off the value,
Not Lizzie.
when we take off the value from these people, and when we take those kind of things away from it, it's about we place value to these things as well. I think that can really help as well. And I think in Africa, like teaching people again, like the love of the land and just what the land can do for you, because some people do really understand that and they just stick to there. They're like, the West has never brought nothing good, and oh my god, and they really stick to that, But I think even like teaching farming methods can really help as well. But the way the West does it, because when I was learning geography in GCSE, the way the West does it is that it places the blame on, this is the natural problem, this is the natural resources problem, this is your dry desert bad farming techniques. But if you actually reimagine, like, okay, we can really actually work with our land and things like that, instead of placing value to rocks, which my kids are dying for, to sit on Lizzie's crown.
Sorry, Lizzie is just taking me out.
Lily, when I copy you, I have your time.
No, honestly, she better watch her back, because what does that even mean? Yeah.
I was gonna add on the second question as well, about how it's not just about the knowledge that's been massacred away, but the knowledge that it's been replaced with. So like the knowledge of knowing how to like live on your land, that's now been replaced with knowledge of how to extract cocoa and diamonds from your land, and about how the knowledge that we value is not knowledge that helps us live, but knowledge that helps us be more productive, or like exploits us essentially. Like, yeah, I was just thinking about like those kids that are mining like cobalt, like what do they know? Like, what's the knowledge that they hold, and how is that actually helpful for them to just live and sustain on their land? Their knowledge is only useful in like the capitalist machine to, you know, to mine cobalt to go into iPhone batteries, and about like not sorry. So like not just about the knowledge that we value, but also the knowledge that we hold and the knowledge that we are allowed to hold, because some of that knowledge that has been massacred away, it's also been like demonized, and not like demonized and I don't know, like incentivized away, like it's knowledge that we're not allowed to hold anymore, as well as it being erased, like the skepticism around like witch doctors and traditional like forms of healing and stuff like that, within Africa, like that's original knowledge, like that's indigenous knowledge that's been demonized to Africans. So I feel like I said a lot, but not just about the knowledge that we value, but the knowledge that we're allowed to hold and the knowledge that we've been given, and how that like helps us or doesn't allow us to live. Yeah. Hallie has her hand up, but Rachel, you can go.
Sorry, I don't want to take up too much space. But is that exactly so what you said? Because even the way they made this knowledge be erased was purposeful. Like they hid words under actual words, under deities' names. They hid their bad words under that. Like it was purposeful erasure. Even everything, the way everything is framed, is to erase something. And that's a really important point.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was gonna say, I think the vilification and like the demonization of witch doctors has just been very sad, like, to see, because it's okay, as much as, okay, yeah, you know, with colonialism came Christianity. The idea that Christianity and all the knowledge of Christianity just trumps everything witch doctors, who are literally people who live with the land and know things about the land, have said, okay, that knowledge is no longer useful. And I think the way that that has been framed as demonic and as, you know, like evil, has meant that even kind of getting your head around the fact that it isn't evil has taken many years, and it's taken like a lot of, yeah, it's taken a lot of centuries. So the knowledge of witch doctors, because of the legacy of like, oh, that person's a witch doctor, or oh, this is like why would you do that? It's meant that that witch doctor has been isolated. Oftentimes it has meant that they've been isolated from the community, and it's like, once that isolation occurs, who's to say that that witch doctor will have anyone to pass that knowledge on, like, onto, if they even want to do that, because of the harm that has come with like, what's it called, Christianity and like imperialism, and how the two work together.
And like, when you're isolated from society, then you have to go into society, and that means that you have to go into capitalism. You can't just be, because like suddenly there's no more children who want to live with you and who want to farm the land with you, and now you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to beg my children for 1p. Like, that's exactly what happens. And even the Nollywood industry has participated in the witch doctor thing as well, sadly, because that is how the effects of colonialism is. It always leaves a legacy, so that even the people on the continent, because Black people are united globally, even the people on the continent will have that same negative feelings about traditional religion. And I think the biggest mishap is that it's always tied to bad things. Like, it's always tied to I want to get my man to stop cheating on me. I want to get I want to get more money. Like, these are kind of very capitalist things as well. Like, I want to get more money. I want to stay in the institution of marriage. Like, but a real healer is that you actually seek out the person. Like, you seek out to pray reverence to those things. And like, even if you look at traditional worshippers, they pray and they give reverence to the ocean, they give reverence to fire, they give reverence to the elements and to the natural world. It's not about, oh, my man's cheated on me. Like, yeah, it's about you seek out knowledge and you learn knowledge. You know, it's all about knowledge, really. And there's so many things that I don't feel like they've been totally lost, but there's a lot of stuff that have been lost because less people are wanting to pass it on, because they have to now integrate, and if they don't, you'll die.
Are there any other hands up? Like this. Okay, I think this is the last slide, so yeah. So we can read these extracts maybe for like a minute or two, and then we'll go on to the rant. Okay, are there any thoughts or anything that you just want to say that we haven't covered already?
I like the second bit about the psychological crisis. I guess this is like kind of wandering into like Frantz Fanon's bag, but like thinking about how it's not just like physical, like it's not just physical, like colonization, but like mentally and psychologically, like internally, and about how, like thinking about how damaging that is to not believe that you yourself have the capacity to transform and develop your own natural, environment, and to doubt and to not love yourself like wholly. Like I just, yeah, just I just like thinking about. Sorry, let me just heading that back in about how pervasive colonization was, like on the mental and psychological level as well. And I feel like that's something that's not really like we don't really talk about it when we're talking about decolonizing, like the damage that has been done. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Literally, like I want to add. The other day, why am I doing story time? Anyway, the other day, it was just me in the house, and there was a spider in my room. And if you don't know, I'm petrified is an understatement. I'm terrified of spiders. But then I was just thinking, like, after the whole thing was gone and like I was there and I couldn't breathe, I couldn't breathe. After that all happened, I was just thinking, okay, Rachel, just be rational. What like why where does this like terror come from? And I feel like a lot of it has been marketing from the West, like Halloween, all these like creepy crawlies, all of those things. When really and truly, like Anansi the Spider folktales are probably the most popular thing about Ghana. And it's like, okay, so what does this terror, what does this like terror of spiders mean? What does that mean? Because okay, here I am in the West, like a product of colonialism, like as a lot of people are. But it's just like as much like the socialization in the West and how that has an impact on like the mental and psychological aspects of like activism and like just post-colonialism and just like like anti-imperialism. I just think I don't know if that story type even makes sense, but what I'm basically getting at is like as much as like the work is being done and stuff like that, but I do think the hold or like the impacts of Western socialization and like Western knowledge has meant that personally for me there has been like a disconnect on kind of dissecting, okay, where does this come from and why is that a thing? Because yeah, like when I hear Anansi the Spider stories, I'm not terrified. As much as it is, like it is fiction, it's still something that is inherent to Akan culture. So yeah, that was really so in conclusion, basically, colonialism is terrible, and it just has a psychological impact that is like, how do you even go back? Like once you're traumatized, like what happens?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that talks to how, like, not just pervasive, but how innocuous it is. Because I'm afraid of spiders too, like, not to that extent, but I am afraid of spiders. But I just always am like, yeah, like, I'm afraid of spiders. Like, it's a natural thing. Like, it's just a phobia. Like, there's nothing to interrogate there, but there is something to interrogate there. And then that made me think, like, how exhausting it is, like to constantly like interrogate and internalize and self evaluate on a mental level as well, like to fully decolonize yourself. It's not just like something that you do for an hour a day, or it's like a constant way of living, and how exhausting it is to do, and how unfair it is that we have to do it in the first in the first place, trying to recover something, but you don't even know what you're trying to recover, because you don't even know, like, am I actually afraid of spiders, or am I afraid of spiders because, do you know what I mean? But yeah.
Honestly, colonialism can absolutely get in the bin. And that's on period. Like
period. In the rudest way possible, please leave. The damage you've done is enough. Like
in the bin and to the trash site. Don't come back.
And I think like on the bit that says this means that the African himself has doubts about his capacity to transform and develop his natural environment. Like what you were saying, Asosa, I think it is so, like, it's just so sad. Like colonialism didn't need to do, like, they didn't need to do that. Like, they just didn't need to. They could have faced their front. But it was the choice of, okay, this is an action that I'm going to do. And I think the fact that it's not only had like an impact on the people, you know, directly, like physically, was like physically kind of like in that environment. I feel like at the same time, trauma and stuff like that, like I heard about epigenetics on the grapevine, and it's like, okay, trauma can be biological as well. So these things have an impact. And the fact that is like, we can do reading clubs, we can do all of these things, like we can think all of these things, but it's always to like, okay, but what capacity, to what extent can we actually do this? Do we have full control? Do we have, and I think it's that kind of like culture of kind of trying to measure how much power we have in these situations, which is very, I don't know, I think for the cause, I'm not sure if it's helpful. I don't think it is.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. Like, you don't need to always measure something. An impact is an impact, because the great thing about knowledge is that if I know something, I will never shut up about it. And I'm sure everybody else is like that. And that reaches out to so many people. So even if you tell one person something, you basically told the whole world, because they're going to tell someone and they're going to tell someone. And I think that's how attitudes are changed. That's how challenges are made in the wider world. And so don't ever underestimate your power and how much impact that can have with just telling one person about this. Because I will say, even, okay, let's say like a general thing like homophobia. In many Black spaces, homophobia is acceptable, and every single time you don't challenge it, it is part of a wider system of not challenging it. But the first time you say, okay, that person might not feel comfortable saying it around you, then they won't feel comfortable saying it after. They'll be like, okay, why am I even thinking this, and everybody else is different. So I think never underestimating the power that we have, and not trying to measure it, because at the end of the day, the measure will come, the actions will speak for themselves. And personally, I think, I forgot what I was going to say now, but just give me a few minutes.
I was gonna say as well, I'm not sure how like much this relates to the words on the screen, but like sometimes I feel like a real displacement on like this land, specifically like in the UK. Like it feels so like viscerally like I'm not really meant to be here. Like this is not my space. I remember like in one of my seminars there was this girl and she was talking about the UN and how the UN is so great, and like the UN does all this amazing stuff and blah blah blah, and we can trust the UN. And I just remember looking at her and being like, I'm not even meant to be in this room having this conversation with you. Like, deep in my bones, I should not I should not be on this campus. I should not be at the University of Warwick. I should not be in the United Kingdom. I'm not meant to be here. And so, like, I think when we're talking about relationships with the land as well, like displacement, like currently, like just displacement, like just no connection. Like, this is not meant to be. I'm not meant to put my hand on this earth and feel like, yeah, I'm connected to this, because this isn't my earth. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Anyway, that was a little bit of a rant, but there we go.
Yeah, oh my God, you made me remember what I was going to say now, Esosa. I feel like, yeah, that's why, sadly, a lot of imposter syndrome, that is a psychological effect of colonialism. It's a psychological effect of imperialism, because you're like, am I really good enough? Do I really deserve this? Like, there's everyone around me suffering, everyone around me dying. Like, what's my place here going to change? Honestly, that is one of the effects of colonialism, and just not feeling like you have a place here. And even it's sad because everybody else feels like that. And that is why the UK is bad vibes. Like, everybody else feels that way as well. And it's just really sad, because when you're so disconnected from the land and you don't even feel like you can go back to Africa because you don't feel that connected to Africa as well, that is colonialism's biggest, greatest win. And the first win is saying, I definitely do deserve to be here, because I'm here right now. Like, if I didn't deserve to be here, I would simply not be here, you know, because there's so many obstacles. Because there's so many obstacles that could have been thrown in my way. There's so many people who have tried to actually kill me along my way. I am here today, you know, honestly. And we may be laughing, but I know my story.
Oh gosh. She said people wanted me dead. No, but honestly, I know.
But I said no, I'm gonna live.
It shouldn't be as funny as it is, but that is hilarious. Oh gosh.
I was gonna say as well what you said about how I can't remember what you were saying, but it made me think of how like colonialism also not only like disrupts our connection with Africa, but also determines the way that we then like reconnect or the parameters under which we reconnect. So I remember like Rachel and I exchanged a few voice notes about this. But when I was going through that crisis, like I'm not meant to be here. My first instinct was like I'm meant to be in Nigeria, like because my family are Nigerian. And I was like, wait, hold up a minute, like who gave me the name, like who gave Nigeria the name Nigeria and drew the boundaries of Nigeria? Like that's not even, do you know what I mean? So even when you're trying to root yourself back in, the parameters within which you're rooting yourself back in are again colonialist, again imperialist, or again white men in your head, you know, yeah, I'm Nigerian, like telling you, yeah, I'm Nigerian, I have a Nigerian passport, I have Nigerian identity. But that's not self-determined. Somebody else drew that and established that and set that up, and then I claim that. But then it feels very like, okay, so if I'm not meant to be here, but I'm also not Nigerian because that's the colonial construct, then what am I, like, do you know what I mean? Like, what is my connection? Like, where am I meant to be? Kind of thing. And that just sends me down like a huge rabbit hole. But yeah.
Yeah, and off that, I feel like the idea of like, oh yeah, like I'm not meant to be here, I'll be better off in Ghana, for example. But who's to say, like, we know that colonialism is a thing, and we know that it was a thing and it is a thing. So when we do go to those communities and we're faced with the same problems of like capitalism, racism, homophobia, colorism, all these things, like it's not the solution that we want it to be. And I know that around like Ghana Independence Day, and then with the like LGBTQ plus like the police basically was terrorizing and harassing the LGBTQ plus community in Ghana, and like they were a few days apart, and during like on Independence Day, so many people were like, "Oh, like Ghana, like amazing, like this amazing country." And bear in mind, a lot of the people who were saying that were part of the diaspora, especially in the UK. But then when it came to like other issues, real issues that affected real people and like real people's safety, there wasn't that same, there wasn't that same level of like, ooh, like Ghana, like, okay, I'm involved in this country. So I feel like for a lot of the diaspora, there's this kind of like hotel kind of projection of what they think that country is, as opposed to actually acknowledging that this is a country that has and is affected by, that has been and is affected by colonialism and imperialism. So just because it's on a different continent doesn't mean that the issues will just dissipate and just fade away because of a plane ride. Like realistically, that's not that's not realistic. Oh, something just happened. Okay. Well, I'll stop sharing my screen.
I just wanted to say, yeah, I really felt that, and that's why you have to, in myself, I feel like I, as much as I do feel like Nigeria is my home, I accept that I was raised here, and that makes me very different from a lot of Nigerians who are on the continent. But seeing like, okay, I don't feel totally part of here, but I have a community here of great other Black people, which is what I've felt really happy to accept. So I feel like my home in the world is South London, but I will definitely surely be moving out of here soon. Don't worry, they will know about it. But no, but I do feel like my community is wherever my people are really, and whoever that people is, we have something in common, and I feel like that's where my home is, because there's many things wrong with both places, many things, but my first home is inside of myself, which I am trying to be more rooted in. But you know, that's why I'm always up and down, because I just don't feel like I have a place. But that's why my first home is inside of myself always.
Sorry, I love that. I'm writing that down. I completely agree, because then and I know that it's like 5:30, so we should probably, wrap this up. But I think when we think about like homes and like the home environment, and then also like the natural environment, I think it's really like whatever feels right, like, yeah, like whatever feels right, I think is right. So then when we think about, okay, like say for example, when people would take pictures and they'll like show, like they'll take picture of like a modern house in Ghana, and then like, oh, or like in any community in Africa, and it's like, oh, like, not all Africans live in huts, and not all do all of this. It's like, okay, as much as that might be your home, what is your home founded on? Like what for it to be your home, do you need to have not ingredients, resources imported from like a Western country? Like what is the structure of that building that you call your home? And say for example someone was to be living in a rainforest, like, okay, that person's home is those aspects of nature. I feel like what we define as home inevitably is very different, but I feel like the purest and like the only thing we can really, especially like not liking colonialism and the state of the world as it is, the only thing we can really say, okay, this is home, this is where I feel comfortable, is like as part of yourself, which, well, personally for me. So yeah, I really like that. And I feel like that is a lovely way to commence, this is
This was amazing. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel and Asosa, for organising this. And I really wish I could have been at more Green Week events, honestly. But I was winning $200. I'm so sorry. A brave student.
Thank you, Rachel and Asosa. Sorry, I cut someone off there. No, I had to miss the middle bit, but I don't think I've been to a Radicals read since Feminism Interrupted last year. So it actually felt so good to be here this time. Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys, for coming. We hope you enjoyed the recording. I think all the other Green Week events are recorded. So
Yeah. I'm gonna stop recording this one.